everyone. Thank you so much for being here. It's really nice to have a Thursday evening full of so many lovely women in the house. As Akanksha said, so my name's Anushka, and I run a company called Civic Studios. It is an entertainment company where we create media with a purpose. We were incubated at MIT in the US, but our office is right down the corridor over there. A lot of what we do is try to create media with social change, anything from education to unemployment to sex education. We try to talk about the problems around us and how do we come up with ways to create a better future. At the core of that question of how do you create a better future is who gets to tell what that better future is, right? So who is it that's on our team? Uh, if it was just men, we would have one version of the future. If it was just women, we would also have a skewed version of that. If we don't have the right mix of a team that comes from a different set of backgrounds, castes, ethnicities, geographies, gender, sexualities, abilities, we would only see one part of the future. I want to start this conversation by making a very honest confession that out of a team of 30 people at our office is, I don't think we are adequately diverse and inclusive. And we're conscious of it. We work towards it. We've had panelists and speakers in our office at Civic Studios to try and understand how we can do it better. We've tried to read up about it. We've tried to put a certain set of practices in place. And we've succeeded in part, but we've not tried hard enough. And I think so we've failed in part. So I'm here, like all of you today, honestly, to learn about better philosophies of diversity and inclusion and better practices of it. Our four panelists here honestly have an incredible body of work and experience that they can speak to answer the question of the panel today, which is how do we shape a better future workforce? So I'm going to give a quick introduction to our panelists. It's not so quick because they have pretty amazing profiles. I'll start with Shilpi right here. Shilpi's been a serial entrepreneur for 18 years with a focus and passion on creating technologies that have more access for people with disabilities. I think ranging from your first organization, BarrierBreak, which offers web accessibility for people with disabilities, to Newshook, now a media site on disabilities and inclusion. She's also helped inform national policy on this issue, is an Ashoka Fellow, a recipient of many awards, which I could not list all, and is listed as one of the top 20 businesswomen in India. So thanks, Shilpi. Very excited to have you here. Yes. We then have Rakhee. Rakhee is currently a consultant at IHCL, handling their diversity and inclusion, but you've been with the group for 30 years before that, right? And you started as a management trainee and worked up to being VP of PR and corporate communications. Through your work, from what I understand, you strive towards equal opportunities irrespective of background and on creating an inclusive work culture where everyone can be their authentic selves. Super. Thanks so much for being here, Rakhee. We then have Sujatha Shivsankar. So Sujatha is an associate partner working in human resources at KPMG. And prior to that, you were at Deloitte. Just checking that my research is right. You've been a gold medalist from TIS, and you've got 2 decades of work experience in this industry. You're a diversity, equity, inclusion leader at KPMG. And in your role, you work with business leaders to strive towards these goals. So super. Thank you so much for being here. And then we have last but not least in any way, Anu Aggarwal. So Anu is president at Kotak Mahindra Bank, heading corporate and investment banking, catering to conglomerates and multinationals in India. You are part of the Kotak leadership team and instrumental in building the bank's corporate banking franchise. And you have been listed as India's top 100 women in finance. So thank you so much for being here as well. So as you can tell, I don't know if I've done justice to their profiles, but there's enough here to know that we should be listening. So I think our aim is to honestly keep this informal. I'll ask some of the questions, but please feel free to respond to each other, feel free to dive in. We will come to questions at the end as well, but I think, if there's something very urgent and pressing, feel free to jump in. So I think, Rakhee, I wanted to start with you. Could you start by helping us just understand the terms diversity and inclusion at their very core what they mean and why that's important, especially, in media. I can understand why it's a bit more of an obvious link, but in the hotel industry, or if someone's running a manufacturing firm, why is that important there?
So there are obviously many reasons that have been talked about why diversity is important, and of course there is a business case which probably is most appealing to most organizations, that organizations that practice D&I are more profitable, and there's a McKinsey report says they're actually 20% more profitable than the other organizations. Leaving that aside, I think what's important is that just bringing in diversity, and this is diversity of all sorts, whether it's sexual orientation, race, gender, age, all of that, is the thought process and the innovation and the creativity that they actually bring to the table, and the problem resolution that they actually can contribute to. And I think organizations are realizing that much more now. Diversity, I feel, is an easier one to address because it's about numbers. And we were just having this discussion backstage, saying that inclusion is really where the issue is. And like they said, it's an old adage which says that, you can call everyone to the party, but to make sure that everyone feels like, they belong to the party and they're enjoying themselves as much, that's inclusion. So inclusion and belonging and making them feel like they're adding value and being valued is an important one for all organizations. And I'm privileged to be part of the Tata Group for the last 30 years. Now I'm a consultant. Whilst I'm consulting with Indian Hotels, I also run my own organization in communications. But of course, D&I is very, very close to my heart. I feel it's inclusion that we all really need to work on. Various inclusion practices, enabling practices, interventions that really make whatever gender, whatever we're talking about in terms of diverse people, really feel like, what, we can express ourselves, we can be ourselves, we can be authentic, and we can show up as who we are. And that, I think, is the biggest difference.
Can I push you just to maybe elaborate on the analogy a little bit about the party? Because I want to take this back to my parents and make sure I have the right analogy, right?
Right.
So is diversity making sure that
you're invited
the right people are invited to the party, and inclusion that they feel welcome?
Absolutely. You got it right.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what it is.
That's a helpful one to take home.
That's what it is.
And just one more. Yeah.
I just want to make sure that as I was listening, and each one of us, I'm sure, has got our own way of explaining what each of these terms mean, right? I always go with head, heart, and hands. That's another way to look at diversity, inclusion, and equity. So, diversity is about the head, it's the numbers, like Rakhee rightly pointed out. So, it's easy to understand. You can see the numbers, you'll be able to figure out how it is segmented. Inclusion is about the heart, it's an emotion. And hence it's difficult because we don't understand as much, and the emotion is very difficult to display, to internalize, to create, to get out of everybody at the same time. And that's what comes in the way sometimes of building diverse and inclusive organizations broadly. Equity is about the hands, and the reason I say that it's about the hands is because equity is about making an effort. It's about doing something. And for the longest time, organizations and many of us have thought about how can we make organizations more inclusive. One answer, one word that keeps getting used over and over again is making reasonable accommodations so that we are able to level the playing field. Right? It goes slightly beyond that. It is about making unreasonable accommodations to level the playing field. Because unless you make unreasonable accommodations, you are no way going to level and give the same set of opportunities for somebody who comes from a very different background, for instance. So that it goes deeper than doing what is visible. It's about doing something that almost seems illegal. And I'm going to say that because you've got to do that if you want to bring everybody up to a stage where you feel like you have the same chance of success. And I think that's where is what most organizations, we in particular, are focusing on, saying, how can you become more equitable? How can you do things and help people understand that It's not about equality. There is a fine difference between doing things equally versus being equitable. So I just wanted to add that on the record.
And I had a follow-up question to that, actually, maybe for the both of you, in terms of since you're working in HR and at an organization where you have to influence other managers and decision makers. Very practically, I feel like what I've seen happen, and again in my own setup sometimes, is that at a principle and theory level, we accept this. When it comes to the practical day-to-day reality, let's say when you're hiring someone, right? The responses you sometimes get in a more euphemistic or polite way, but they boil down to we have to, when we're hiring somebody, we're trying to hire the best person for that role, for that certain skill set. You're already doing it within a certain time crunch. You're already doing it within a certain budget. You're already doing it with, you might have wanted 5 candidates, you've got 2, and now you've got to pick one out of that. So then the response I hear is that on top of all this, how do you then prioritize a certain gender or a sexuality? What is the response that you would give to that situation?
So I can take that question, and then she can add as well. It has to start with goals. So whilst I said it's the numbers matter, it does matter. So in certain organizations, they're all sort of aiming to be equal. So which is 50% diverse, sort of segments of society need to be represented, and that's how the HR lens needs to look at recruitment. But sometimes it's difficult because sometimes there's that whole mindset about some people don't fit into that role, women will not fit into that role, it's going to be difficult to get women. Now, how do I keep that target? And those are that's the dilemma that they go through. But there's a gun on their head saying, hey, it's a target, so fill it. So I think somewhere at that point, we need to also ensure that we're equally supporting competencies and capabilities and saying, okay, we will look at this role, we will get a woman in, but we will support that person by ensuring that we enable her more, or enable that person who we are taking, gender neutral person that we're taking, in terms of actually making them competent for that role. So skilling and competency and development actually goes hand in hand with that whole meeting your target and your sort of recruiting process. It's a difficult one because it means additional effort, but it needs to be taken to be able to reach a certain level, a respectable level of representation. I mean, that's a simple answer to what you asked me.
No, what I wanted to just say is about my own experience. So I had the corporate and investment bank at Kotak, and it is such an old boys club, right? This is not consumer bank, and forever you will see one woman in a boardroom, 2 women in the conference room. But I can tell you that with our own experience and at senior board level, at senior management level, we realize the benefits of diversity. And what Rakhee also mentioned, you Google today, there's so much information, all data, all statistics point towards that organizations which hire more women, who are more diverse, they eventually perform better. So frankly, we as organizations have to do it for our own sake. It is no more just a box that needs to be ticked. If we want to be doing financially better for our shareholder value, for our better performance, I think just for our own sake, we have to do that. And my view is that boardrooms, senior management are seeing benefits. And I think they are sold to the idea. But what's not happening, it's not trickling down. And that is what I think that is really required. So I think once everybody realizes the benefits, then it is not about an agenda. It is about you need to do it for your own sake.
Shilpi, in your experience, how have you... Sorry, did you want to add something to that? Okay.
Well, I wanted to actually tell you how I did it.
That's going to be my question, so go ahead.
So, when I started BarrierBreak, I was the only person. The first 4 people I hired were independent. I initially started thinking I'm going to make a women-only company. The only person we had as a male was our office boy, and we were 19 women till I suddenly struck me that I wasn't interested. In those 19 women, we were 4 people with disabilities, right? Because we work in disability and inclusion, accessibility as part of it. So at 19 women, I finally said we got to change the conversation. On the board, we were 2 women, and there were no male there at all, and we But when it came to the company as a whole, we started to shift. At 19, I actually hired my first HR. And she walked into the room and said, Shilpi, can we change this? I said, yes, we can. I don't know how to because the bias might be mine, right? I might be just looking for it. And we started to shift that. We actually made our office boy a graphic designer, right? And hired another office boy. And it started really from there. Today, we are fluctuating between 45 or 55 on either side. On some months when we're hiring more men, it's okay. But we are making a conscious decision. We look at our numbers, but we don't only hire for the sake of hiring. Right? But we do look at our numbers, and when it goes out of bounds, okay, are you sure there aren't any people in this, so you need to make that open. Our policies are also kind of like that. Right? So we allow people to take leave, to start with that. We don't say they have to come to it. Right? And we will need for those extended allowance that other people want. We don't have this written down in a policy. Right? But our policy is, and we have this training guidelines, so we have policies, but the policy only has to be there so it's valid. At the end of the day, it has to be based on human rights. Right? We are also a company which now has 55% female disability. And even in that, we are diverse to the point of hiring people who are deaf, people who are visually impaired, people who have challenges, people with learning disabilities. So all I can tell you is possible. Right? And it's not so easy. It just takes a little bit of effort consciously as somebody leading and just showing people the direction that this option is there. Today, if you ask my women at manager level, if you want men or women, they all say women. They say they're better managers, they're more compassionate, they've got more empathy. Right? And then I have to tell them, don't you think we need men also as project managers? Then we have to bring that on. So you have to keep shifting that back. It doesn't happen.
Thank you for sharing that. I wanted to ask a follow up to that in terms of the practical implementation of something like that, right? If in the organizations that we're running here, that we're part of here, if we wanted to be more inclusive of people and members with different abilities, how do we practically go about that? My recruiters are not automatically sending me profiles of people with different abilities. So, where does it start from, and what kind of infrastructure do you need to be mindful of, and how do you think of the costs that that's going to incur, right? You want to commit to that, and you want to make sure you budget correctly for that. So how do you go about thinking about this and convincing your management of this?
Okay. Okay. So when it comes to people with disabilities, just hire your first person. Don't need for more than that. The team soon realizes that when they start working with them, and don't think so much about the cost and all. I'm going to say something I tell the large corporates and they hate me for it. Because I keep telling them, build inclusion while you go along with it. With the people who you bring in. Right? So yes, you might need a ramp, I'm not saying no to that. But that is not something that stops people from entering. Because you can find ways to get people to enter. Like you said, if you don't bring them onto the table, there is going to be no inclusion. So the first thing that you do is do that. If you don't have a ramp in place, tell your people we work with you build it. So I rented an office space and I have a lot of visually impaired people. We want to drill on the labels, right? And we went to the owner and we said, can you do this for us? He said no. So I said, will you allow me to put stickers on it? Right? He said yes. We built inclusion. Right? We go and buy a coffee machine, it's not inclusive by default. We put tactile labels on it. We built everything ourselves, literally, because the systems don't exist, or the solutions don't exist. So inclusion starts like that. If you keep waiting for that big budget, you're never going to do it because the problem is ROI. And everybody gets stuck with that ROI. So start with just hiring your first. They will bring 2 or 3 friends along with them. Then you say, I'm looking. Reach out to non-profits who might be able to help you. I don't think it's the best way, but reach out to non-profits, they might be able to support you. There's an amazing organization called Political Advantage, and they have a board, a job board, where you can put up jobs for people with disabilities. They're a good start to go to. So there are lots of ways, but it's like any other hiring, right? It's referral, it's putting it on boards, it's going outreach to the right organizations. You might go to colleges to recruit. You might go to computer training centers to train people with disabilities. That's the difference. And there are reports that say that sometimes the accommodation is less than $1 of cost. Right? But obviously, that's a big conversation we had.
Can I add to so there's a slight cultural angle to doing building an organization and inviting people from diverse backgrounds and just different situations into an organization. I think the challenge is not the money. It's never the money. The challenge is, do we know how to work with them? That is the challenge. So you always have to start with helping people understand what they can do to help. I always start with allyship. I always start with awareness. I always start with disseminating information. And while that is important, it is always the first step to helping people understand how can they at an individual level make a difference. Because all of this seems very 30,000 feet, right? It seems too strategic, for lack of a better term. It isn't. If diversity and inclusion together have to work, then each person has to do it. So share more. So I always start with that. That's a good place to start. Help people understand what does it take to work with somebody who has a visual impairment? What does it take to work with a person who has chosen an orientation that he, she, they like? Start there. So one is just disseminating that information, having courageous conversations about what you're able to do, having processes that subscribe to the fact that you are supportive as an organization, whether that is influencing your simple things like your insurance programs. Make it gender agnostic. It takes effort, but it makes a statement. And if you do that, then you will find many, many more troopers coming along and saying that, okay, this is the organization. This is the culture of the organization. Size doesn't matter. And we are supportive. So sometimes showing that support at a much grander level does help in building that allyship, that culture of ambassadors coming along, and start there. From there on, then it is about streamlining and then putting it through your processes. Now, I like the idea of working with a lot of strategic partners because this is a specialized space. All of us don't know enough. I personally don't know enough. So do I look for experts in the field who are able to advise? Absolutely. And there is no shame in learning on this at all. So bring people in who know how to find the right talent for you. I was just speaking a little while ago with one of the members here, sitting here, and what I said was, I think there is a fundamental issue in the way we look at diversity hiring. The issue is we look at positions and we look at people. That is not making a reasonable accommodation at all. You have to look at people and then create positions. And create a position that accommodates for the skills that they bring. That is when you're making a reasonable or probably an unreasonable accommodation to making diversity work. So it goes far deeper, and that's why I said there is a cultural angle to it. It takes an entire village, a city, a country, an organization to make it happen. So just wanted to bring that up.
No, that's very helpful. I think what I'm taking away from this also is that the commitment and the intent to do it is really what you need to drive in. And it's true, whenever you have a problem in life, once you're committed to something, you find one way or the other to make it happen. I know you said that banking can be a bit of an old boys club. How does the intent begin to get seeded in a place like that before you can even get to the action? And I think from what I understand in banking, you have less than 7% of the top management being women. Across the private and public sector. You've, of course, broken all of those barriers to be where you are. So what have you kind of learned along that journey, and what would you advise on how that intent can be further seeded in that industry?
So I think where we really started, and we have a very, very long way to go. We are just about scratching the surface. And I'm seeing this across banks now. So one is you start with numbers, like you said. I think that box is now getting ticked. So numbers, as you will see across banking, are rapidly, supposedly increasing. Now, where we need to really do a lot of work is the equity part of it. So it's not so much about equality, but it's about equity. It's about, like you said, making those unreasonable accommodations, finding positions and not finding women for positions, but finding positions for women. All of that, I think, is a lot of work that needs to be done. And I think it really starts from us. That's my personal belief. I think, for instance, all of us in this room are highly privileged, and it really begins with us. And like what I'm hearing from my younger generation of women who I'm hiring, they're saying that we don't want special opportunities. We want equal opportunities. And they're telling me, Anu, diversity is not about including women for their gender. It is about not excluding us. So when you're doing the next project, please put me as the head of the project. When you are forming a next new big committee, taking a large new initiative, trust me for it. So I think, and that is how it will just gradually build and gradually come. And like I said, it's really all of us who have to begin, have to do it. We are also privileged. And, like if we can't make a difference and if we can't speak up, then we need to give up our seat at the table.
Then this links to a conversation I think we were having earlier backstage, which was around the value of tokenism and where it's important and where it's limited. So this is an open question to all of you. How would you see that, and how would you describe what is important to do so that you don't stop at the tokenism?
So I just want to also give you the tourism perspective, because I think there are some myths around the hospitality industry and tourism. They feel like there are lots of women in that, it's more accessible, it's a more approachable industry for women. But surprisingly, if you look at the global statistics, it's about 46% globally, and this is just structured tourism. There's also an issue of data availability, but it's 46% globally, and it's something like 20%. This is global workforce. And when it comes down to tourism, it's 40% globally, but it's 12% in India. And when you break that down further, it's only like 2% in the senior management level. So there's a huge issue in terms of representation at all levels, junior, middle, and senior, when it comes to hospitality and tourism. So it's even lower than finance, from what it seems like. So we need tokenism, right? So we need to make the right moves, say the right things, get the right people, get more women to inspire other women. But then, like I've always believed in, is that get the women, but retain them. What is your retention strategy? Is it as impactful as your hiring strategy? So which means that you have to make sure there's engagement. And what happens is that everyone, like she said, is ticking the box, but are we giving them that voice? Are we actually making sure that they're growing along with the organization? There are cultural issues, there are issues. We live in India, we're not going to overnight be able to change the way mother-in-laws think, or parents think, or tier 2 cities, tier 3 cities think about safety. All of those are real issues. And like you said, your previous point, there are, you need to make some expenses. So for instance, at the Taj, we make sure that we drop women back post 7 p.m. wherever they are. And that makes, parents feel safe that, okay, my daughter is taken care of and please they're getting dropped back. So some of these interventions actually help in increasing retention and, of course, getting people on board. So that's what translates into action. So tokenism is one thing, keep hiring, keep looking for women, but then to retain them, you need to work alongside and understand their issues. So things like, redressal committees, D&I councils, just engagement, having people that they can talk to, express themselves, someone guiding them, mentorship, very, very important. Sponsorship is another very, very important element, as I think everyone will subscribe to, is because what happens is when discussions about growth and, so the next level of promotion is discussed, it's always the first thing that comes to their mind is, oh, we can move this man because he'll easily sort of go to this other city, he'll go to Rishikesh, or he'll go to Coimbatore, or whatever. But and then the mindset is that, but she's very good, this lady is very good, but she may not move. And they make that assumption even without engagement in asking. And I think we need to move to that, and that's real action. And the last bit is that you can't achieve action unless the leadership subscribes to it. The top person, the CEO and the executive committee and the leadership team actually believes in it, subscribes to it, and demonstrates it. And only then will you see action. Because if you don't see action then, you just see like statements being made, it's not going to cascade down. So that really is like the biggest issue.
I had one more question that I'm, going to open to the panel, and then we'll open to the floor because I'm sure everyone has questions here. Often, when you're thinking of hiring somebody who might be coming from a traditionally marginalized or discriminated background, that person has been behind the starting line right from the time they were young, from the time they were in school and college. It may often be the case that they don't rank up in the same way in quote unquote the merit that you might define that merit as. How do we start to rethink the way, when we're hiring particularly, rethink what we define as a good or a weak candidate? Because often those measures are based on quote unquote the normal or quote unquote the mainstream that you might be used to hiring. So how do you reimagine your definition of strengths and weaknesses when you're trying to hire with a D&I purpose in mind?
So there are multiple ways to do it actually. What we look for is two or three things. One is learnability, which is more important than the skill itself, because teaching a skill is possible, provided you've got an environment or an infrastructure, and not environment, that supports it. Right? So what we look for is, does the person show high levels of learnability? Does the person show high levels of wanting to do something with their career, invest the time in their own development? And then we look for some baseline skills, which is required anyway. So what I'm saying is, there is a difference between looking for the best candidate versus looking for a candidate who could become the best over a period of time. So it's not new actually from a hiring standpoint. It's not something new that I'm speaking about. Earlier we used to look for the perfect fit versus the near fit. When you used to do skill-based hiring. So this is a little bit like that. So knowing, and that's making accommodations for the person. So I'll give you an example. Very recently, we were looking for somebody to be hired in the audit practice, and we found somebody who was visually challenged, and he went through the interview, this gentleman, and he cleared the interviews, and we realized that he's good for the job. Little did we know that he has a visual impairment. To me, that is the ideal way a good recruiting process should work. If you're looking to hire the right person who comes in with the right kind of skill sets, but you don't get that a lot of times. You don't. So what I had was, a lottery ticket. And it doesn't hit all the time that way. So then what do? Then you instead go ahead and make sure that you're aware and your hiring team is aware that you're not going to find the perfect fit. And hence we plan for the training. So if you plan for it, there is a lot more acceptance to saying that, okay, we know that we planned 3 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, whatever that is, to invest in this person and make sure that the person is able to execute to clients. At the end of it, you do have to get performance and get performance delivered for a larger outcome, right? So if you're able to build that clarity, saying that here's the time, this is how we're going to do it, you would see that it works better. But then informing, involving, training, sensitizing the people who are hiring becomes quite critical in a situation like that. Because otherwise it's not going to work. That's what I have seen, that being very clear that okay, this is going to be how we do it, and letting them know how to interview, because interviews are different for people with disabilities. You have to, for instance, if somebody has a hearing impairment, you got to speak much slower or at a higher pitch, depending on what is the impairment, and be cognizant. You don't have to shout. So some people do that because you don't know enough. You're like, okay, I'm trying to help. That you're not. So some of that sensitivity is just developing that and telling them, let's be a little more sensitive to the candidate, and then do it that way. That's exactly how we do it, especially when we try to hire in larger numbers. We actually run whole campaigns helping people appreciate how to make it happen, and then of course we celebrate in a big way as well.
Just to add to that, I think now there is a little bit more cognizance around the fact that different segments of diverse groups have different strengths and talents. And that sensitivity needs to be present in the HR stroke hiring sort of group of people in organizations. So that if suppose you look at women, like women come with empathy, they work harder. I'm sorry if I'm offending the men here. But they come with those strengths. The men come with their own strengths of risk taking and maybe being more decisive, etc. Maybe I'm being a little biased here, but there are some things. So those are the strengths. And when you look at differently abled, there is that hunger to actually sort of make a difference. They may be talented, maybe be far more creative than some of the others. So the idea is to recognize what those strengths are and how you can adapt it to different functions of your organization. I think it's very important to realize that. And of course, like she said, sensitization is extremely important because you can hire them and then they can feel miserable about it. And that's not acceptable. So it's a concurrent process that needs to happen.
So, totally agree with what both of them have said. But I think it's also about changing what you're looking for in a candidate, right? So at BarrierBreak, most of our job roles will even take a person with a diploma. We don't only want a graduate or a master's or whatever. Learnability is the biggest thing that we look for. We work in an area where we don't get even able-bodied people who know accessibility testing. We teach everybody from zero, right? Because our industry doesn't have a educational qualification in this country. Nobody teaches it. So anyway, I have to teach you from zero, whoever you are, and whatever position you come in. You might be a developer, I have to teach you everything. You might be a software tester, I have to teach you everything. So we realized that one way of building inclusion was to take away some of those barriers that we have put in from a hiring perspective. So one of the areas might be, so lots of people told us, women don't make bad developers, right? You don't get very technical women at the end of the day. So why don't you take them in tester roles but not in developer roles? And largely my team had all women developers, so I used to be very excited about it. So I think you can shift those conversations and those biases, and I think just look at candidates for who they are, right? And take that. You might have the trainings in place, and you might have to modulate them a little. Like BarrierBreak, being as small as we are, we yet have a sign language interpreter in house, right? And we can't survive without one. So that works for us. But you need to decide how far you want. Right, and it's not very difficult. She also works as an HR backup person, right, in her spare time because she doesn't have interpretation all the time that is required. So you find ways to cross-skill, you find ways to balance. But I think more and more corporates that I'm seeing are willing to drop, the education qualification, especially in disability, because very often they don't get the opportunity to go that far. So you have to think differently. And as long as you're willing to think differently and out of the box, you will find inclusion, diversity, and equity, all of that.
I think that's a really helpful reframing of how to think of something not as a weakness in any way, but to design so that you're identifying strengths that you may not have traditionally defined as that. So I'm definitely learning a lot from, like I said at the start of the conversation, but I'd love to open it up to the audience. I'm sure there's several questions.
I've been thinking about, we currently don't have any differently abled people in our office, and I've been thinking about it for a while, and I often struggle with the practicality of it. How am I going to really make it successful? Not so much from an organization point of view, but I really don't want anybody to have a bad experience because your environment doesn't really support, right? So of course it's great that you're able to do that. What I want to understand is a very practical question. What kind of roles are you really bringing these people in? Because if I really want to make a start, where should I start?
Firstly, it's people with disabilities, and don't be scared of saying that. That is the word to use. You don't need to use differently able or specially able or any of that. Where do you start? Wherever you have a role, right? You can start with an office boy, you can start with a software tester, you can start with a receptionist. I have people in all roles. I have people in sales, I have my chief accessibility officer, Shilpi herself. My production level head is somebody who has a disability. My content digitizers are people who have a disability. My graphic designer has a disability. My testers obviously have a disability, a large number of them. So you can go from anywhere, right? As long as you're willing to put in that little extra to change your organization a little. So here is a very simple example of a shift, right? So we have a graphic designer who is deaf and hard of hearing. Needs sign language interpretation, doesn't need, he won't be able to lip read or do anything. So we have the sign language interpreter in-house. But now, the best thing that works for him is if I show him examples of things before I meet him, right? So I send him 6 examples and say, we'll talk about this. And then he's kind of prepared into the conversation. So some of it is iterating like that, right? I'm willing to go that extra leg, so it works. But when you start thinking about it, even if it was an able-bodied person, if you've given them a brief before you met with them, you would do better off in that conversation. So go from there. So if you have, start small, start with one person. Start with whatever's the disability you're comfortable with, right? And then go from there. So some people find it easier to hire people who are physically challenged because, sorry to say this, I'm sadly the camera's on. Should I? Okay. You're too scared to hire visually impaired. It's too much. I might not be able to handle that disability. You don't want to hire the deaf because you don't think they understand. So let me just go with something who's a physical. But whatever you're comfortable with, don't get pushed around by what people think. If that's what you require in your organization, and if you can find a candidate for that, go with it.
Sorry, could I just I feel like I'm resonating with the practicality of the question. Where do you start with the first person? Are there like special recruiting agencies that
You can, yeah. So I can give you some Youth for Jobs, Sarthak, quite a few actually. Enable India. Yeah, Vishesh is there. So there are quite a few. A lot of them will tell you that we will scale for you. I don't think that's the best approach. I don't believe in that. Oh, okay. Please.
That's one.
Hi.
Yeah. Hi. So I'm the founder of this organization called MUN, which is in Santa Cruz. We train people with intellectual disabilities and autism who come from low socioeconomic backgrounds. So we train them in areas like F&B, hospitality, retail, and clerical jobs, and then we provide them with employment opportunities. Very happy to be here today amongst everybody, and I just wanted to also thank Dextrus. They have taken the first step towards being an inclusive workspace and just hired one candidate from us.
Congratulations, and congratulations to you. So just start small. Don't wait too much.
If I could add, just to build on what Shilpi was saying, that the experience has been so amazing because when you look at Chirag, and Chirag is one of our team members now, you think, like you just said, then how would he fit in? We had so many apprehensions when we first met him to actually having him on board, and it took us less than a week to make him a part of our daily lives. And now you won't even realize that, okay, Chirag has some sort of disability, right? It's that simple, it's that easy. It just needs a little leap of faith. And organizations like MUN, who've done the groundwork, who've done so much to make sure they're ready to be a part of the workforce, ready to be a part of the normal life. So that's a very good example of how you don't have to, you just have to take that leap of faith and just go with it. It's my bad.
Chirag has the brightest smile. Maybe as a follow-up, that we are open to it, maybe some of the resources can be shared about like the name and all that. Yes.
Can I add something? Yeah. I mean, starting small, yeah, and I think inclusivity at different levels. I'm an interior designer, and when I'm working on floor plans and designs for my clients, okay, it really pisses me off when I'm sitting in a meeting and there are a lot of people who address in a floor plan we have like, oh, that's my kid's room, that's my, sorry. Yeah, so starting small, what I was talking about. So when I'm working on a floor plan, when I'm sitting across with
a lot of clients, I mean, I have amazing, clients, and it kind of puts me off sometimes when, people at that level sometimes, address on the floor plan. They're like, okay, that's my kid's room, that's my, my in-laws' room, and then when it comes to their staff or their house help, it's like that's the servant's room. So, and I keep, correcting them, saying that's not the servant's room. It's your house help. It's, probably there are different terms. No one is a servant. So that's where I think I have started bringing that shift in my studio, because I tell my assistants, my designers, my junior designers under me, that when we are labeling our clients, do not label anything as a servant's room. When we get floor plans from builders, it's written servant's room. Correct it. That's where we will start that shift, because no one is a servant here. Okay, everyone is, I guess, worthy of respect. So let's really respectfully, include them and not just leave them out and like call them servants. So that's my shift. Yeah. Thank you.
I need to say that. Okay, it's fine. Hi. So I want to share something and also ask a question. I'm from an industry which is very homogeneous. I'm from the diamond industry. I'm a diamond educator. And we have a goldsmith that we work with. We call him Gunga Bera because for the obvious reasons, And everyone admires his work, and he's seen as someone who is probably having more abilities than all of us put together, because the work he comes out with the limited hearing and other senses, it seems that it's very much appreciated. So that's a kind of appreciation from a sector which is not very, very educated and evolved. But had it been a lady, or had it been someone who had applied to an office for a kind of work, they would not be seen in the same way. There was a point when I was in the manufacturing sector in my family business, and there was no ladies' washroom because there were only men. So it was quite a rare sight to have a woman coming to the office as well. And there would always be a time where they would be like, okay, I'd rather talk to your father, we'll figure it out. And I said, no, I'm here representing him, so we need to either close it here or then we don't take it further. But that, to kind of make that shift for yourself and to make it for the people around you, it was really tough. And then this one incident happened amongst my own friends. One of my friends, she is epileptic, so she would have moments where she just can't work. And this was the reason why she was not getting employed anywhere. And she beautifully used that to start her own business. And now she's employed other epileptic people for the same business, and she's probably been acknowledged because it's something you need to run your own business while you're looking for employment. Yeah. So my question to everyone here, because it's so beautiful to see that all the different walks of life are also considering to create a more equal platform. How would you generally address an industry like that, where the people going ahead want to make a difference, but because of the old mindsets and barriers that have been there for years, there's just no system. So you have to be in the system to change the system. So how would you guide on that note?
I think it's a really good question. I wish we had an equally good answer. Unfortunately, we don't. It needs, like everyone has said, a leap of faith. It needs that start. It needs that beginning. You need to show, demonstrate that, listen, we can make it happen. And even if it's that one person, like you guys took that one person, and that inspires 3 other people, and that's how the sort of, that's how, awareness is built. So it is leap of faith, definitely. It is consciousness, it's sensitization, it's more networking forums like this, it's conversations, it's expression, it's having a voice like you do right now. I don't think we used to talk so much about it earlier. I was just saying, I think that shift itself is positive. And we need to continue expressing this, whether it's through social media or networking or whatever forum that you want, so that people realize that it's important to make that, even if it is that one shift she's made by saying, let's not call a servant, let's call them help. And, they're all human beings and they deserve dignity. So I think it all starts with us, I think, and making that one single sort of good shift and leap of faith.
And it's actually people like you. You stood there and you said that, I'm here, my father's not here, conversation ends here with me. And I think that is the big thing. And I think people don't do that. Right? So if you start doing that, and I think all of us have faced it, not that we stir with a breeze, I faced the same thing as an entrepreneur. Right? So when I started, there were very few women entrepreneurs. And I remember my first VC meeting at TIE, and I was out of the place. Everybody thought I was somebody's wife. Nobody thought I was the entrepreneur there. So it just starts with you, and then you go about pushing that envelope. I think every one of us has done that. So that's it. Don't look for a process, just go ahead and do it.
Can I add one point to that, which I think it's also about good politics.
I feel like you need to find like one other person or one or two other people in that space who, and like every group out of like 10 will have one good person, right, who's willing to take that step. So I think you find that other good ally and then nudge them, and then, you go on to work with them to push that. Yeah, I think she had a comment on this, and then if you want to do the question on that.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment on this fantastic panel. First of all, congratulations and thank you for being the part of this discussion. I want to cite an example that I run a food factory somewhere near Pune, and this is like one of the parts of the rural Maharashtra. Out of 40 people, 35 are women. Yeah, and I'm telling you, they do such a fabulous job. 36th person is a physically disabled person, and there are only 3 men. My husband excluded, but okay. So my point is that it also depends on the kind of a society that you build around the whole system, because they have to be accepting it. They are the first ones to really feel that, look, I know this person is probably differently abled, but he is a part of my overall working or overall ecosystem, and I must accept that person as he or she is. And I think only then we can make a difference. And you don't find that in the society. So even if I want to recruit a person, if I have 1-2 people thinking very odd about it, I think we won't be able to make it. So that's where I felt that including me, my husband, and all the people, they have to accept that person in a manner. And then there is no sympathy, okay? It's about being compassionate, being considerate, but at the same time, you got to drive your job. So that's the way I would look at it. But a large part of the work has to be done by the society, is what I feel. Because I also run a rare disease organization. Yeah, and they're hugely traumatic and, differently, very, very differently abled. You probably wouldn't even have seen people of those kinds. And every day in and day out, they face the trauma and they just don't want to go out. I'm very happy to go talk to a few of you here and really understand what else can be done for these people, So thanks so much. And that is something which I felt I should be commenting. Thanks.
Yeah. So I'm from the Dextrus team, and I belong to a military family. Talking about military, there's nothing called as diversity practically over there. So that made me realize, being in the HR, that engagement, when you talk about retention and engagement, goes much beyond organization, and it actually starts from home. Right? So I spend a lot of time and I get exhausted talking about diversity and inclusion within our society, and nobody seems to understand that. Then now it kind of scares me, because I have a daughter and I have to educate her, and she's growing up in this society. So for people like us, where home itself is a problem, what do you suggest? What is the steps that we can take as HR so that we make sure that people from that background kind of get the opportunity?
It's got nothing to do with HR actually. two or three things. I have a son, and he is 16. And one of the things that I started doing very early on, and that's the impact that I measure myself by, is how much of that mindset and openness am I able to create in his mind. Right? So I started having conversations. I remember when he was 12, we had the first conversation around boys and girls and physical development, and then 2 years later, we were speaking about sexuality. We were speaking about choices that people make. We were speaking about orientation. And now he can actually sit down and have a chat without feeling uncomfortable about any of those topics. So I think that is what I personally have done in my capacity as a mother to further the agenda. In fact, one of the things that we have signed up together is that if he ever sees a conversation that seems to be non-inclusive or shaming a friend who would be acting differently than what conforms with the normal in school, then he would be the one to stand up. And there was one instance like that that happened last year where he would have stood up for somebody who was getting bullied for being different. That to me is great performance in what we can do individually in our family units. It's a small unit. If I zoom that out, I'd actually catch children of all my cousins and sit down and have a dialogue, right? So you pay it forward, but I know he's having the chat with his friends. Every time there is a diversity dialogue that we have in office, and for the most part we are still hybrid, right, virtual, you'd see that he'll come and sit in and listen and try and understand what's being said. So I think paying it forward, equipping the next generation with enough ammo to know what these differences are and how can you best uh, bring out an emotion and a behavior that's inclusive is all that we need to do. And for me, even if you can do that for one person, that's enough. So I'll leave it at that.
Hi, my name is Sakina. I wanted to do two things. One is add to what she just said and what you just said. I have a 9-year-old myself, and my husband has a tendency of being very cuddly with her. Once she grew out to maybe 4 or 5, she started being a little averse to it. And my husband was like, Baba, I'm your dad. Like, how can you not let me cuddle? And how can you not let me kiss you? And things like that. And at that point in time, I actually stopped him. I said, no. She's saying a no, it's a no. If you don't respect her no, and you tell me I'm your dad, you tell her I'm your dad, and I'm allowed to do it, let me do it. Tomorrow, her boyfriend was going to say the same thing and she's going to allow. Her husband is going to say the same thing and she's going to allow. That's not the precedent you want to set for her. You want to say, the day she realizes that if I said a no and my dad agreed to it, then dude, you don't stand a chance. So, yeah, that is what I'm doing at my house level. But nonetheless, I'm failing miserably at the office level. I run an organization. It's a small organization. You all come from very big corporate setups. I have a team of 10, including an unpaid me. And I'm the only lady in the house. And I've been meaning to hire an accountant. I'm in the process of hiring an accountant right now. And after interviewing about 3 or 4 or 5 ladies, one of my older workers comes to me and very nicely puts it that, Bhabhi, can we not have a woman? Koi aadmi rahega to acha rahega. And I was like, what? And he was like, haan, sab aadmi log hai. So how are you going to do? I mean, we work as a family, right? It's a very small setup. And most of them have worked with me for 6, 7, 8 years. And if they're coming across and telling me they're uncomfortable with a woman, how do I deal with that?
I dealt with it. So when I went from hiring women and started to hire men, all my women came to me and said, why are you hiring men? Aren't we good enough? You have an advantage I didn't at that time, which is you can say you like working with me, so you like working with her also, is the line I would use for them. I didn't have that advantage. So what I had to do was I interviewed and I made them interview with me. We actually found a candidate that they liked, right? That they found comfortable with. And that was the first male that we hired. They all yet are friends with him. I am no longer on his Facebook, but they are. So you can understand that. So I think that might be a way you can try that, as to make them comfortable, or maybe hire a woman who comes through their recommendation. You know, that's another one. I tried to do that, and I think he came through one of their recommendations, because then that person already sold on, and then that person sells it to the next person, and so on and so forth. Thank you.
Super. I think this has been a really, really informative evening. I knew it was going to be interesting. I didn't think it would be this good, but I will say it's been spectacular and a lot of learning. Thank you so much to LWL for organizing this. Thank you so much to Dextrus for hosting this. Thank you so much to all the panelists for being there. I just want to conclude by saying one thing, which is that I don't think it's easy to practice good diversity and inclusion practices. I think it's a lot of hard work to be open-minded and to make those mental shifts, to question and evolve your policies, to find allies at your workspace and to push new practices and do it in a sensitive and sustainable way. You're tired just thinking about it. But I think that that hard work is only beneficial for our businesses and the organizations we work at or we run. It's only beneficial for the workforce because we're expanding that workforce. But I think most importantly, it's what we owe each other in a humane society. So thank you so much again for all your thoughts. Thanks.
I also want to add that all of us have some backing or the other in terms of organizations and brands and all of that. But I'm so impressed with so many of you who've spoken up and the others perhaps who haven't, who are doing this on your own with limited resources, limited people, and are still actually demonstrating and practicing diversity and inclusion. So really kudos to you. Keep doing it and inspiring many more people, because that's how the shift will happen. So thank you to all of you.